I'm going to say welcome officially to everyone, even though I've been saying it all along. And thank you, Joyce and Jean, particularly for joining us, but thank you everybody else as well. I was telling Joyce how much I appreciated the book. It was definitely not my style in general because it's a little esoteric for me in general, and I just couldn't put it down. So I'm not sure what the combination was, but it's definitely worth reading, and I'm not right here. So it's really just an incredible book, and it gives so much of the context of history while weaving through this story. It really allows you to immerse into the culture and into the time period. And I think some of it, just like some of the words like booze, like just some of the words that are put into there, or, you know, instead of politic, they say, oh, politic. Well, I'm giving the N, but the B instead of the P, some of the things that go in there were really important, particularly. And it also is such an important time period in history because you're evolving from this wonderful open community to this problem with the World War II and this tension and real riots and pogroms, or however you want to semantically call them, which is much better done in the book than me. Obviously, Joyce did a better job translating it than I could, but the concept and just, you know, one of the things that I've heard before, but it was just funny when it came up again, is not funny, that Adolf Hitler was actually Egyptian, right? That was the rumor going around. His name was actually Mohammed Haider, not Adolf Hitler. And these are the things that kind of make it so real and so engaging. So in addition to the whole storyline going through it of Zohar and everybody else in there. So I definitely appreciate the book, and I think we can get a lot of the historical context from there and apply it to us. And we were talking before a little bit about the interactions between Jews and Arabs, Israelis and Arabs, and I think it's interesting to see the different conflicts and cooperations that were had throughout the ages. So I think it's very pertinent to today, sitting here in Israel. So I do want to say thank you for translating it, because I would not have gotten through it in French. And thank you both, Jean and Joyce, for coming. Little logistic thing is just you are all, everybody besides the three of us are on mute and cameras off for the presentation. Right after the presentation, I will allow you, I will invite you, actually. I think everybody would love to see each other and actually talk. So we'll do that after this presentation. And so just stay with, if there's anything urgent or anything that you want me to pass on right away, or if there are any logistic issues, please throw them into the chat or in the Q&A. I am monitoring throughout. It's not that I'm disappearing, I'm just handing it over to them. I would like to formally introduce our two speakers today. Joyce Zonana was born in Cairo to Jewish parents. She is a writer and literary translator, a professor emerita at the University of New York. Her memoir, Dream Homes from Cairo to Katrina, In Exile's Journey, was published in 2008 by the Feminist Press. Her translations include A Land Like You, Seagull Books, Malacroix, New York Review Books, and The Beast and Other Tales by Northwestern University Press. She has published numerous critical studies and reviews of other Egyptian Jewish writers, including Andre Aciman, Lucette Lanyadoo, Jacqueline Kahanoff, all the big ones, basically, Paula Jacques, and Yitzhak Gomez-Zano Goren. That's our main presenter tonight. Here to interview her for us, and in her own right, a writer, is Jean Mosseri Naggar, who was born in Cairo in 1937. She left in 1957 as a result of the Suez Crisis. Jean Naggar's poetry has been featured in The Listener and Atanor. She has been published in the New York Times, The Village Voice, Publishers Weekly, and Writer's Digest. She's a voracious reader all her life and translated several novels from French into English. And we will share with you each of their websites and their information afterwards in a follow-up email. But now, nobody came to hear me talk, so I'm going to hand it over. And I will be monitoring the background, so please be sure to say anything. Thank you so much again, Joyce and Jean, and I'm handing it over to you.
Thank you, Dora. I'd like to start with how Joyce and I got to know each other. Because Joyce left Egypt when she was very young. I left Egypt at the age of 19. And this is part of what I think a lot of the literature about Egypt that's coming out now and has come out in the last 15 years has been about, which is the very varied communities in Egypt who all interacted and who have continued to interact 60 years down the line or 50 years down the line. So Joyce and I first met at another American Sephardi moment where we both were on a panel together and really sort of discussed how we had left Egypt. And Joyce had just published Dream Homes, and I had just published Sipping from the Nile, My Exodus from Egypt, 2 memoirs. And so through the years, we have maintained contact. And I was very excited to read the Tobie Nathan book, which I thought is one of the most extraordinary books I've read in many, many, many years. It's not just a wonderful book about Egypt in a much more complex and comprehensive way than I think any of the books that have been written about Egypt. But it's also a work of literature. And I would like to say that I mean, it would have been a very difficult book to translate. And I think Joyce's translation is quite extraordinary. I did not realize I was reading translation. And as I have translated, and I do read a lot, I'm usually conscious of a translation, but there, nothing. It was just the pure story, the pure writing, the reflection of the French in a way that was quite extraordinary. So I just really think that I did not so long ago do a piece on leaving Egypt for Paper Brigade, and which is part of the JCC. And in doing that, I read a lot, if not all, of the books that had come out of Egypt, including the Lucette Lanyadoo, the André Assiman, which I absolutely loved when I read it years ago. That was the first one to come out about Egypt. But also other books that are less well known, but also give a piece of the overall mosaic that is what the Jewish community in Egypt was. It was not a monolithic community. It was many small communities who all interacted, but who were very, very different. And of course, Tobie's book focuses on the Haret, the Jewish quarter, and it's absolutely wonderful. So Joyce, do you want to say something about it?
Excuse me, I want to say many, many, many things about it. But to start, I want to thank the American Sephardi Federation and the Institute for the Jewish Experience, and Drora for inviting us to make this presentation, Jean for joining me. And I also want to thank Seagull Books for publishing the translation in English. Many people know how difficult it is to get translations published, and I'm very fortunate that Seagull wanted to do it, and I had wonderful support from them. So I guess I want to start by talking about why I translated this book, or how I came across the book. So I have read, like Jean, I've read a lot of Egyptian Jewish literature in an effort to connect to that culture that my parents brought with them to the United States, but never really told me very much about. And a friend, also an Egyptian Jewish writer, Elio Zarmati, recommended it to me. He said, if you really want to read a book that takes you into the magic and the mysticism and the true, he called it, I think, the real world of the Hara, this is the book to read. And from the minute I started it, I knew, and maybe even before I started it, I knew that I was going to have to translate it. It completely captured me. And if I can, I just want to read something from the very opening of the book, which I think sets the tone of it in a way that is just remarkable. So he starts out by saying, Egyptians are cannibals. Consider a fava bean. Study it well. You'll see how much it looks like a fetus. Since antiquity, Egyptians have been fava eaters, fetus eaters. My mother's name was Esther. She must have eaten thousands of fetuses before finally becoming pregnant. And then he goes into a description of his mother, Esther, getting up before dawn to cook ful medames. And ful medames is like the national food of Egypt. And it's right here on the first page. And we have somebody cooking it, and we see the gestures of her cooking. But then also right on the first page, there's a wonderful passage that I think, again, marks this text in a way that other Egyptian books have not been for me. So it wasn't every day they could have favas and eggs for breakfast. So that really tells you how poor these people are, because favas and eggs are actually the food that the poorest people eat in Egypt. Okay, but the night before, she'd stopped by to see her aunt, who'd insisted. Of course, Esther had refused. They weren't beggars, after all. Out of pride, yes, not just that, out of politeness as well. You never accepted gifts without being forced. First, the other person had to stuff something into your pocket, to pretend to be angry, to swear it was a question of life and honor. For the love of God, you have to take these favas. You have to. But never. We don't need them. I swear you won't leave until... It was only then, as if unwillingly, and after several offers, several refusals, that you agreed to accept anything. Sophisticated etiquette that grants the greatest generosity to the receiver. Thanks to this haggling, Esther had returned home with a basket full of dried favas, dates, coffees, and apricot paste, the sweet we used to call Amar al-Din, moon of faith. So that's the first page of the book. And I couldn't resist that. And so I plunged right into it. And the first 100 or so pages of the book really focus on the life of this very poor, very traditional, indigenous Egyptian Jewish community in the Hara. And then it opens out to include much more. But it starts there. And for me, it stays there in a very profound way. I know, Gina, that you and I talked about this. We talked about the Hara and is it representative or not? And I just, if you want to say something about that.
Well, yes. My grandfather's house actually had a synagogue in the garden. And every Saturday, when I was a little girl, these people would come for services, and they would come to the synagogue. And I didn't realize until I was much older that they were actually Jewish, because they dressed exactly like the Arabs in the street. And I didn't realize that there were, different gradations of how people lived and, how they experienced Jewishness. And it was all mixed up together. And there was always a feast on the lawn afterwards for everyone to come and eat. And that was my but my real experience of the Hara. Then, of course, I learned about it, and I learned that many of those Jews had been there for centuries, practically, and that it was a really extraordinary group of people. And the thing is that I think that your novel, that Tobie's novel,
Tobie's novel.
I think of it as your novel because you did such a great job. But Tobie's novel is quite extraordinary because it also captures the magic and the mysticism that surrounds everything. These are not people who necessarily know science. So anything that happens to them, they see within a frame of magical happenings, of mysticism. And they interpret everything that way. And that makes it so wonderful and so rich. And yeah, that's it.
So I'm going to share my screen for a moment as I make a couple of points, if that's okay with everybody. I just want to say some things. So this is Jean's and my memoirs, which is where we first met. And here's a little picture of Tobie. And what I want to show you, or what I want to give you, is Tobie Nathan's quote. And this is, I think, really important. Here's what he says. It must be said that the Jews of Egypt, those in wool suits, as much as the idlers and galabeas, all came from the same cesspool, those few narrow streets crammed with synagogues and saints' tombs known as the Hara, the alley. So I want to talk about that quote in a minute. So here's another picture, really good picture of the alley in 1959. Here's another picture of life in that part of Cairo. And this is downtown Cairo, which looks obviously very different. This is sort of middle class Cairo. This is where my family lived. This is where my family grew up. And this is where Jean's family grew up. This is the Mosseri house. So you do see that we're representing, this is also in Jean's house, a wide range of social classes. And I said, and the Jews in Egypt came from many, many, many places. Some of them were indigenous Jews who had been in Egypt for millennia. Some were Jews who came in the 19th century when Egypt sort of opened up to outside business opportunities. Lots of people came with the opening of the Suez Canal. And then people came in the 20th century. So there's many, many layers of life of the Jews in Cairo, in Egypt. And I asked Tobie, why did you say, first of all, why did you set your novel in the Hara? And why do you say in that quote that I offered that everyone is really from the Hara? And I want to read you what he said. This was a conversation I had with him, an interview. He says, I like to think that all the Egyptian Jews came from the Hara. I know it's not entirely true that there were many immigrants coming a little bit from everywhere, but the heart of the community is the sand of the Hara, the mud of the Nile banks. I wanted to show that we are of the earth, of this land, right? So this is like a deliberate, conscious choice that he's making to create the Jews of the Hara as his focal point. His own family did in fact originate in the Hara, maybe not in the 5th century, but pretty far back. His great grandparents who lived in Egypt. On one side of his family, there were rabbis, including a grand rabbi of Cairo in the 19th century. On the other side of his family, they were goldsmiths, jewelers in the Hara. And we sort of see that maybe in the name that he gives his central character, Zohar, whose there are many different translations of that name, but I translated it as jewel. And so we see that connection. And another thing about his choice of the Hara and his interest in the Hara is his whole idea of it as a source for Egyptian Jewish identity. And he specifically uses the word source, meaning a spring, rather than the word roots. And he thinks about a spring as something that can dry up, right? If we neglect it, if we don't take care of it. And what he's doing in his work, I think, is replenishing that spring or opening up that spring and giving those of us who are from Egypt and people from outside as well a way of connecting with what that identity is. Jean, you want to
Yeah,
add?
I was thinking that what was also particularly interesting was the connection between the Hara and the Egyptian quarter, the Arab quarter, which was right close by. It flowed back and forth.
Yes.
There was no, this is you and this is us. It was, we're all here together. And everybody kind of, the interesting thing is the two milk twins who are at the center of the novel. One is from the Jewish Hara, the other is from the Arab quarter. And it's just, it's a wonderful, it shows how it was all from the same spring. Everything was from the same spring. And it's only later that things became much more tense. But in those early days, which he talks about, it was all one thing. Now, I mean, my family actually originated in Spain and went to Italy, to Livorno, and from Livorno crossed the Mediterranean and arrived in Egypt in the 1700s. And I remember that when we were asked to leave the country, a man came to our garden and he said to my father, you have to leave tomorrow. And my father said, what do you mean leave? I mean, this is my country. This is where I live. And he said, no, you have to leave tomorrow. You're Italian, but you have to leave. And so my father said to him, well, how long have you lived in Egypt? And the man had come from the Sudan. His family had come from the Sudan. And he said, I can't remember the number of years, but he said a number of years. And my father said, my family has been here over 200. We still had to leave. And I think that, there's a sort of basic melancholy in many Jewish people and Jewish communities that has to do with exile, has to do with the fact that sooner or later we are exiled from somewhere. Sorry. Anyway, that's my feeling, is that there is a sort of, in a way, an understanding of the possibility of exile. And for Tobie and his family, who'd been there, from the beginning practically, it must have been a terrible shock.
I'm sure it was, but in an interesting way for him. I mean, when his family left, they left in 1957, and they went for a while to Italy, and then they settled in France, and they settled in the outskirts of Paris, in a banlieue, in a sort of big housing project. And in that community, there were, he says, something like 150 Jewish families from Egypt.
Okay.
And he says of that they reconstituted a ghetto of their own, right? So they had a really big community, and they continued speaking Arabic. And so they there was that displacement, of course, but maybe not the same kind of displacement that you or I experienced. I mean, I know my family, when they came here, there was no community at all. And when I was growing up, I knew no other Egyptian Jews except my relatives, who didn't come until much later. So we were very, very isolated, which is why I went on this project of finding and creating a community. So I think Tobie was able to carry a lot with him. He calls himself now a perpetual migrant, and his work, he's a psychiatrist. I think it's important to say this. He's an ethno-psychiatrist, which means a psychiatry that is based in anthropological knowledge of different peoples and working with different people's belief systems. And he works primarily now with migrants. He's written a great book another great book that has been translated. It's a psychoanalytic study called Wandering Souls, and it's about um, radicalization of Islamic youth in France. And he sees the people that he's working with, the young people that he's working with, as people whose souls are lost because they don't have that connection to the source, right? That they lost that connection to the source, and therefore they jump onto ideologies of different kinds. He talks about himself in that way when he was a young man, getting involved in certain kinds of political movements. And again, his answer to that is connecting to that source. So that book is called Wandering Souls, and he calls himself a perpetual migrant, right? He
Well,
sees
it's interesting, Joyce, because I mean, I made a note to myself that the book is, for me, a piece of literature about the exiled soul.
Yeah. Well, and the speaker of the novel, right?
Yes.
The narrative voice. There are two narrative voices in a way. There's an I, who is Zohar as an old man living in Paris, thinking about Egypt, missing Egypt terribly, terribly, and missing Masrea, the woman he had loved. There's that voice that takes us through. Then and it comes in at different moments, but the rest of the novel is narrated in the third person. But we always know that there's that man looking back with longing at his life in Egypt.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what he's doing. Yeah, I want to talk about for a minute. I want to talk about this idea of attachment to the earth, and the distinction between attachment to the place as a physical place and the earth in general, and identification with a nation, right? So, right. So,
of course, because the Egypt
that's really
of the novel no longer exists at all.
right. Well, it does exist.
Well,
the Nile is still there.
No,
the Nile is still there.
But the Egypt that's described in the novel, the Egypt, the spirit of it, is no longer there.
I think some people might question that, Jean. I think there might be some debate about that.
Well, it's interesting. I've been reading a lot of notes that people put on my website and things, where I get the feeling that there's a young generation that craves more information, more understanding, and more.
Yeah. And so in that hunger, right, there is a possibility for a recreation of a society, right, that was a more multicultural and cohesive
Absolutely.
society. I don't know. I don't know.
Well,
But
incredibly multilingual and multicultural.
yes, yes. And speaking of multilingual, I just want to say another thing about this book. So I'm getting distracted by what I'm seeing in the chat. Um,
Sorry, I'm taking care of it.
that's okay. So I translated the book from French. The book was written in French. But the people in the book most of the people in the book are actually speaking Arabic to one another, right? So this is the people in the Hara speak Arabic. And this is the first, to me, that I know of, Egyptian Jewish novel or memoir even that I've read that really focuses on Arabic speaking, right? My family, we spoke French. In many families, they spoke French, but the language that people speak here is Arabic. And just want to read one little passage. Yeah, their tongue was an Arabic mingled with Hebrew expressions and words from many other languages. And of course, he sprinkles Arabic throughout the text. And I guess one of my favorite lines in the book, which I will try to quote from memory, I might get it wrong, but Esther, Zohar's mother, is she's planning to go to a Muslim healer or shaman, really, to be able to get pregnant because she's been trying and trying and trying to conceive and she hasn't been able to do it. And so there's this whole debate about whether it's okay for her to go to this next door community to do this. So even though the communities are very close, there are still divisions between them. And she says, we live beside the Arabs the way a man might live beside his innards. Their tongue is in our mouths. Our tales are in their Quran, right? So that's a really wonderful expression, right, of the profound bond that exists between Jews and Muslims, right? Also Christians in that Egypt, right? Because there are also passages that talk about the Christians. There's one passage where I can't remember the line again, but it's like, we're all Egyptian. But again, it's Egyptian not in the sense of Egyptian nationality, but Egyptian groundedness in that earth, in that place, right? Does that make sense, Jean?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And that earth consciousness, if you will, is something that really drew me to the book as well. The spirituality in the book is a spirituality that comes from this connection with the earth, right? And Masreya, the woman that Zohar loves, that is his twin sister, her name, Masreya, I translated it as the Egyptian woman, but someone else recently offered, I think, a better way of saying it. She said it's Egypt in the feminine form, right? Because it's Masr is the name for Egypt, the land.
Yes.
Masreya is Egypt as a feminine. And so, Zohar's love for Masreya is obviously, it's a real love, but it's also profoundly symbolic and beautiful, I think, is very important. They're called one soul. She's called his double and his other half, right? So they're really deeply bound. And you, Eugene, you had a love story in your novel, in your recent novel,
Yes, I
which
did.
involved a Jewish man and a Muslim woman, right?
Well, there is, yes, the connection. It's a very different novel. It's in a way grounded much more in the recent exile, and
Mhm.
I particularly wanted to talk about people who were not able to adjust, as happily my family was, and your family was eventually able to. But these people, some of them were not strong enough. They were pulled out of where they had been rooted, and they were no longer able to find a, a place in the world. And
Yeah.
so I talked about a lot about that, but there is also a love story. It's I called it Footprints on the Heart, and that was how it felt to me, that on my heart there were footprints, and I wanted to follow them, and I wanted to see where they led. They would not necessarily lead to me; they would lead to other people with other experiences,
Mm.
and I really enjoyed writing it.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I mean, it's interesting that there is now coming to be a larger um,
Literature.
publication, right, of literature and writing by Jews from Egypt. It's as if in the first years there wasn't space, to deal with the trauma of
There
the.
wasn't, you know, it was all
Yeah,
about
yeah,
survival.
yeah. Yeah. I also have another little theory. I've had this theory, which is also that I mean, we have to face it that the Jews in Egypt did not suffer like the Jews in Europe did, right?
Right.
We had
Most,
to leave.
yes,
We had to leave, but we weren't exterminated. Um, and there wasn't the kind of concerted effort to destroy a people, um, and um, and I think and at least in the United States, we had lots of literature about the Holocaust, right? And how could we talk about what had happened to us,
yes,
right?
exactly.
Because what happened to us was not the Holocaust. Um, and so there wasn't like cultural space, in a sense, for bringing up these kinds of stories. Um, and I think now we can start to tell them. Um, but they're not the Holocaust. They're something else. And we need to look at what they are instead, what they're
Yes, they are
doing.
stories of exile,
They are
and
stories of exile.
exile, is always hard, but it
Yeah.
doesn't compare, of course, with the Holocaust. It doesn't try.
Yeah, no, but I think it's really important. Um, One of the things that when I was talking with Tobie, I asked him what writers he admires, like what writers influenced him in his work. And I don't know what I was expecting. I was expecting like some French novelists or some maybe Egyptian writers. I didn't know. And what he said was Isaac Bashevis Singer, um,
Yes,
which all of a sudden
how interesting.
when
Yes,
he said that to me, it made me understand the book in a whole new way. And so lately, I've given myself this little job of reading a story by Isaac Singer every morning, and they're like amazing stories. Um, but they are all stories of a kind of mystical, um, very deep um, spirituality that also involves believing in demons, believing in possession,
yes,
um, and also a great sense of humor. And one of the things that's in this book too is a lot of fun. There's lots of fun in it, and there's jokes in it. And so anyway, that was kind of exciting for me to discover his affiliation with
It's
a
a
writer
very
that,
interesting comparison.
isn't it? I mean, it's his.
Yes,
Yeah, yeah.
yes.
And it makes total sense. It makes total and complete sense. Dora, you're popping up. Does that mean we should start thinking about questions, or what do you
Well, I
think?
was thinking it might be nice if we open up, but I didn't interrupt. So you tell me if you're ready for.
You're very subtle. Um, let me just say one more thing. I just want to say one more thing, and it might be something we talk about later. The book is, as we've said, sort of mystical and fantastical and symbolic and so on. But it's also deeply, deeply grounded in history. So all the major events in the main character's life are keyed to major events in history. So there's 1918, 1925, 1938, 1942, 1956. And he gives us these dates, and he always, or not always, but almost always, gives the date in the Christian calendar, the Jewish calendar, and the Muslim calendar, which I think is like, really, I've never seen that done in a book before. And he brings us also some historical figures, King Farouk, Gamal Nasser, Anwar Sadat, and we see, we really see the events that led up to 1952 and then eventually 1956. The book ends in 1952, but we could see where it's going. So I'll stop there.
Well, I do want to say one thing also, which is everyone should read this book. I think it's a wonderful, wonderful book. It's been a long time since I've read a book which touched me so deeply, and which I mean, the writing is fantastic. So that's my last word.
And I couldn't agree more, I have to say. Like I said, it just draws you in. So I'm going to read out the first question. And then I'm going to, while they're answering, I'm going to allow everybody to open their cameras and their microphones. Please do, because it's nice to have the back and forth conversation. But the first question is, I'm intrigued by the multilingual aspect Mrs. Zonana, mentions. Did this present any unique or specific challenges in the translation process? And thanks for this moving discussion.
That's a beautiful question. Yes and no. What can I say? So one of the things that I felt reading this book on first read was that this was a French unlike any French I had ever read before, but exactly like the French that I grew up speaking and hearing. So this was Egyptian French, which was interlarded with Arabic, actual Arabic expressions, and even I would say Arabic ways of speaking. And so on the one hand, it was easier for me to translate this than to translate a novel in classical French, which I had done right before doing this one. On the other hand, there were the actual Arabic words, which sometimes I wanted to provide an appropriate equivalent for. Sometimes I just left it in Arabic, but sometimes I had to search for an appropriate equivalent. And so I had to turn to people who spoke Arabic. I don't really speak Arabic. And what else was I going to say about that? Yeah, so both challenges and things that actually made it relatively easy for me. Yeah.
I'm gonna let Jean continue unless, if there are questions, wave to me or raise your hand on the, or comments. Don't just call out. Oh, Anne, sorry.
Anne has a question.
Yes. And you need to open your microphone.
Was I waving?
Yeah. Yeah, you
Okay,
were.
well, I do have a question, although it doesn't follow from the last one. I was very struck by the writers, the Beshevis singer reference, and I wanted to ask each panelist which writers they admire.
Oh my gosh.
I know, it's broad.
Jean, I'll leave it to you while I think.
Which writers I admire. That's difficult. I for many years, I ran a literary agency, and there were so many writers I admired. I don't know who to pull up. I mean, I do think that the comparison with Isaac Bashevis Singer is particularly apt if you can translate it from one kind of thing to another, which you can. But no, I'm not. I really can't think of anybody to say, because there are so many for me.
Well, I mean, as someone who taught literature for 30 years, it's also pretty impossible for me to say. But the first person, two people that just came to mind, just the first name is Jane Austen and George Eliot.
Of course.
Oh, well,
Jane
yes.
Austen and George Eliot. Can't go wrong. Yeah.
I was trying to think contemporary. It was not working.
There are many wonderful yeah, there are many other wonderful writers, but yeah, I'll just stick with that for now.
Thank you.
Oh, I'll add one more.
I have a question.
Okay, can I just
1 minute, Rachel.
I'm just
Hi, Rachel.
one more thing. I just read a whole bunch of novels by Maryse Condé, a Guadeloupean writer who just won a major award, and I would recommend her. Totally.
Very good. Thank you.
Rachel?
Hi, this has been so interesting to me. I'm from Egypt, and I have been we lived in France for 2.5 years, but we lived in Paris at the time. And we moved back east to Baltimore originally. And my question to you is, I really don't, as you said at the beginning, my parents told us a lot about our history. And we got a little bit here and a little bit there. And my question to you is, the only book that I've read about Egyptian culture is The Man in the White Shark Suit, which was amazing to me at the time when I read it. And I am really interested in reading some other books about Egypt, but more contemporary with the Jews in it. And the reason, I think for me anyway, for our family, excuse me, we didn't have a lot of, when we moved to Baltimore, we didn't know any Egyptian people. I think there was one family, but most of our family had moved to either my father's side moved to England, my mother's side all moved to Israel back in the early 50s. And my father never thought anything was going to happen, but that's not here or there. But the point is, I always found out information from my family members, cousins and aunts. So I don't really know a lot of the history from Egyptian history, or for that matter, literature. So what books would you recommend that have to do with Egypt and the Jews and the Jewish people?
Okay. So I would recommend this novel. This novel.
I'm going to get that.
It's really going to give you a really broad picture of a lot of things. Another book I would recommend very highly is this book called On the Mediterranean and the Nile, which just came out a couple of years ago. And we'll put it in the email that we sent to everybody.
Great.
And it's a study of 5 Egyptian Jewish writers, but it has a really great opening introduction. And in the introduction, she gives a really lovely overview of the history of the Jews in Egypt. And there's another really great book by a guy named Joel Benin called The Dispersal of Egyptian Jewry, which talks about what happened in the 40s and 50s and 60s. And it's a really good book also.
And I'd like to recommend The Last Watchman of Old Cairo by Michael David Lucas. It's a wonderful book. It's well written, and it's very interesting and brings together a whole lot of different historical moments and historical things about the communities.
Beautiful.
Right,
Thank
and,
you.
and the interactions between Muslims and Jews.
Yes.
That particular book.
Oh, very nice. Michael David Lucas.
Michael David Lucas is called The Last Watchman of Old Cairo.
Okay, nice.
Really wonderful.
Thank you.
Alan is asking if there's any mention, and I don't remember this, any discussion or mention in the work of relations between the Karaite Jewish communities. I don't remember.
Not there's one sentence that says something like the Karaites were like everybody else, they were Egyptian. That's about it. There's no real discussion of the Karaite community. Yeah.
Miriam,
No,
you need to come off of mute. You're on mute. Miriam, you're on mute. Yeah. No, you're still on mute. Okay.
Yes. Hi, Joyce. It was wonderful. As usual, learned a lot. This just reminds me of when I was doing the research on my the Iranian playwright who had just moved to France. I think it was just right when the Islamic Republic had come. And he was extremely attached to Iran. And he had written like 30 some plays. He was a psychiatrist, whatever. And he wrote amazing stuff when he went to Paris as an refugee or emigre or whatever. And he said that the life of exiles is always suspended. When you were talking, it just really touched me because it is true. On one hand, you are related to your background, and then on the other hand, you have assimilated to the new place.
Yes.
And it was very, very interesting. He was also politically extremely active, and if he went back to Iran, he would definitely be arrested and executed and all of the above. But he always said that he actually went one day and they all went after him to the airport and brought him back. But this is how much he was attached. And what you were talking about, and I think Jean also was talking about how much it was the question of survival. It's very interesting. And I like the fact that this book is also very historical and goes from different, and then the language, he also talks about, so it's so many things involved. Do you think that they were also politically active, any of these people in this book?
Active in what, politically, or
Yeah.
what do you mean?
Against the regime, where, I mean, it is always political. Any work of literature, as far as I'm concerned, is always political. Like, you know, where they really mixed with the Arab world when they were living there.
Oh, that's a really good question. Can I answer that, Jean? And then I'll give you.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think one of the things that's really cool about this book is that, so Zohar is the main character, and he's kind of a magical, shape-shifting character. He has 2 very close friends, 2 Jewish young men like him. One of them early on becomes an Arab nationalist, actually identifies, he starts going to meetings. This is in the early 1940s. Tobie Nathan sets it up so that a young Nasser lives in the same building that he lives in. And Nasser starts giving this guy books to read and encouraging him to think about the suffering of the Egyptian people, especially under the occupation by the British. So Nino is his name, becomes an Arab nationalist. He eventually even converts to Islam and becomes a really radical person. But so there's that character that's very important and very sympathetically portrayed. There's another character who becomes a Zionist and wants to go to Israel and fight for and he says, I want to fight for our people. And Nino says to him, our people? What are you talking about? In Egypt, our people is the Egyptian people. So that discussion is very foregrounded. And then there's Zohar, who says of himself, he was just Zohar, who didn't participate in politics, but felt it in his body. So that's I don't know what to say. Yeah, and I asked Tobie Nathan, which one are you? And of course he didn't answer me, right?
And there's all of them.
All of them, yes. And there's a character in the novel who says to Zohar, always remember, you are not one but three. You are not one but three. So all of those perspectives. Yeah. You have other questions?
That's wonderful. Okay. Well,
Oh, I want to say one more thing. So this is a novel by a man with a male central character, but I also want to say that it's a profoundly feminist novel with profoundly powerful female figures in it and a really deep understanding of patriarchal oppression of women and the resistance against that. So in addition to all the other things that are going on in the book, that's also
and underground women's circles as well.
Right. That's right.
Power that's from that.
Yeah.
And
I'd like to add that it's an absolutely wonderful read. One that if you read it, you will never forget.
So Esther has a question here. Joyce and Jean, what are your thoughts on Haret al-Yahud TV series aired in Egypt in 2015? I don't know if you've seen it.
Nope.
And how does this compare to your experiences in Egypt? But if you haven't seen it, then it doesn't help. Have you seen it?
Maybe I haven't seen it. Elio, did you see it? Did you see it? Did anybody?
No, I didn't see it.
You didn't see it, Jean?
I didn't know about it. I would have wanted to see it, but I didn't.
What is it called?
Called Haret al-Yahud.
What is it? I'm sorry.
What was it called?
Haret al-Yahud. Here, I'll put it into the chat.
Which is the
she said Rebecca thinks it's on YouTube. So
yeah. Has Rebecca seen it?
I watched the first episode with my mom and then forgot about it up until now.
So maybe we'll go back and read.
I am to go back to it. Yeah.
I have not seen it either. So
is it? Are there subtitles? Are there subtitles?
Yeah, they're on YouTube, and I think it's automatically subtitled. But this was like a year or two ago that I had started to watch it, and then I totally forgot about it.
But I know that when it came out, it was seen as part of this more sort of movement towards liberalizing of Egyptian discourse about the Jewish presence in Egypt. So there was a movie made by an Egyptian filmmaker about the Jews of Egypt, and then there was this. So there's more sort of circulation of the memory.
Yes,
Sami Ibrahim has his hand up.
Yes, I see that. I was going to get
it
there.
was interesting that
Jean-
considering the amount of of generations and decades that Jews were very much a part of Egypt in many, many levels, many ways, that there were 50 years at least where the young people grew up not even knowing that there had ever been Jews in Egypt.
Mm.
You can get that from chat things and everything. They didn't even know.
I'm sure Sammy has something to say about that as well. But Sammy, it's nice to see you again. If you wanna...
Yes. Hello.
I,
Can you hear me?
Mhm.
Yes. Concerning Haret al-Yahud, the series, this was broadcasted, I think, 5 years ago. And regardless what it is, because it has been criticized by a lot of people, including the Jewish community in Cairo, the few Jews who remain here. But let's say that for the first time, the heroine, the star, that been incarnated by a very famous one called here, Minna Shalabi. For the first time, the Jews are beautiful.
Mhm.
So there was not something the creepy, the ugly people, and it was a nice story. So escape the fact that the Jewish quarter was not so clean, so nice, and so beautiful as the producer wanted to show. But it was a kind of beginning of a different perspective of seeing the Jews of Egypt.
Yeah.
So this is concerning this episode. The second one, I wanted to ask you, Joyce, about something that I'm thinking about. All the memoir, all the novels that we are talking about is always about Jews leaving Egypt. You think one about Jews who remain in Egypt can be also seen and sought by a diaspora?
I think that would be fantastic. That would be fantastic. Yeah.
Because sometimes the choice of leaving Egypt, sometimes people decide to stay, like for instance my father.
Yes.
And there was a price to be paid.
Yes.
And unfortunately, not only for him, but also for his descendant.
Yeah.
But there was always a way of choosing. Let's say that personally, I think that life it's an accumulation of luck. You don't choose where you are born, how we're going to be your destiny, your parents, and a lot of things. But some of us have been put in situation where they had the luck to stay, and some also had the luck to leave. But we shouldn't judge this. We shouldn't judge them.
I think that's a really, really, really important point. When I went back to Cairo, I went in 1999 for the first time. And I went to, I did a lot of things. I went to the synagogue in Cairo, and I met some members of the Jewish community there at the time. And I met a woman named Golda. I don't remember her last name.
Goldina.
But Goldina. I met Goldina. And Goldina and I had a wonderful time together. And we were born the same year.
Really?
And
so I know when you are born.
1949. Okay. And I thought, you know, she could have been me. I could have been her. What would my life have been like if I had stayed? You know, I mean, it was just so fast. And, you know, I had whatever the chance, whatever it was chance, not negative, not positive, to end up in the United States. And it shaped me in many ways. She was shaped by her experience living in Cairo.
But let's admit something, that the Jews here are better seen than before.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah,
I think
the last
so.
the last 6 years or 7 years, and I will tell you how it is now with all the problem happening in Israel. Here in Egypt, they are not confusing between Jews and Zionists, or Jews or Israelis. Now things Israeli. Now it's changed. So they understand that Judaism is now it's a kind of religion and identity.
Yeah.
And this is, I think, it's a big improvement with the mentality with people that have been learn how to hate the word Jews for more than 70 years.
Yes.
Now it's changing, and this is very important.
That's wonderful. That's really,
wonderful.
really.
But also, you know, a lot of the people who left did not leave by choice. They were actually turned out.
I would say that this was for part of them, the one who didn't have the Egyptian nationality, because it was easy to kick them out since you're a resident here. You're not you're a patriot. You're not you don't have a nationality. But the one who had Egyptian nationality, and this I estimated not more than 20 to 25% of the Jews of Egypt, they could have stayed, because they had this choice of if you want to go out, you cannot come back. For instance, my grandmother had this after 64. She wanted to leave to France, and the only choice was to resign her, let's say, I would say, apparently, but it's not, because this is not legal. This is not legal. So they made her make a paper, signing a paper that she renounced her Egyptian nationality in order to have this access of leaving, of the permit of leaving. But the reality, they didn't took the nationality. And this is what I'm saying, that any Jew that had the Egyptian nationality can arrive again now and claim it, and nobody can say no.
Oh,
because this was not legal.
Right, right.
But the one who prefer to have, for some reason, that prefer to have different nationalities, French, British, you name it, for them it was easy to kick them out.
Yeah, and we have to acknowledge too that when some of the Jews in Egypt, who, like I'm talking about in the 30s and the 40s, had those other nationalities gave them privileges, right?
Exactly. The mixed tribes. This is for sure. You're 100% right.
There was a benefit to that.
Yeah.
And then there was the downside of that.
Exactly.
And Jacqueline Kanoff and also Tobie Nathan, both. Jacqueline Kanoff has a passage where she talks about her father saying something like, you know, that the Jews sort of acceptance or identification with the British occupation was not going to do them any good in the future, right? And Tobie Nathan says, I don't remember where in another of his books, that that the Jews of Egypt didn't understand that adopting the French language was sort of their death sentence, right? Because they used, you know, many Jews in Egypt spoke French, and that cut their ties with.
But this is the aristocracy language. This was not only on the Jews. This is This was a kind in a certain moment of Egypt history. This was a kind of a fight against the British occupier.
Of course, yeah, and against colonialism and
exactly.
Yeah.
But what we should highlight also, that the first communist party that have been created in Egypt have been founded by Jews.
By Jews, yeah.
Oh.
And unfortunately, one of the big mistakes that have been done by somebody, for instance, like Henri Curiel, if you heard about him, he advised Jews to leave and to continue fight from outside. This was a big mistake.
Mm-hmm. I didn't know that he did that. I didn't know that.
Yes, you have to read his book, Anom Apar.
Yes, okay.
It's a very, very, very interesting book.
Yeah.
What is that called again?
Anom Apar.
A man
Okay.
apart, right? A man
A
apart.
man apart, yes.
A man apart. Yeah.
It's a very important one because this is you have the whole history of his fight.
Has it been translated? Do I need to translate it?
I think it's translated in English.
It is, okay. Somebody else
I
has
think
done
so.
it.
Maybe no. I think so. We have
Okay.
also translated in Arabic. Yeah,
Yeah, I'll look
it's a
for it.
very important book.
Yeah.
A man apart.
Yeah.
Are there a lot of Jews living in Egypt now? Or
You can count them
I know it's
using
not that many.
you can count them using your 10 fingers.
Right,
Yeah.
that's what I heard. But there's still synagogue, right? There's a synagogue.
Of course, 12 more synagogues than Jews.
Yeah.
And they're beautiful, some of them.
But I also want to say, you know, when I did go to Egypt in 1999 and other years later, I went with a Muslim friend who's also from Egypt, who was also born the same year as me. And she said to me, how should I introduce you? What should I tell people? And I said, well, tell people I'm an Egyptian Jew and I'm coming back. And so we did. And everybody said to me, ahlan wa sahlan, right? Everybody. Now, maybe that they just said it to my face, but they said that to me, right? Welcome.
No, things are changing. Things are changing
Welcome
for
to your
sure.
homeland, you know.
For sure, are changing. Young Egyptians are seeking a hidden part of their history that they didn't know. A lot of them didn't know that Jews lived here in Egypt.
That's right.
So we need to get the Tobie Nathan book translated into Arabic.
I would love to. This would be a very nice. This would be a very nice.
I think it would be a very good addition to the canon.
It is, since the one of Lucette have been sold very well.
Yeah.
I know Al Rosenblatt has a question, but for some reason, I don't see it. Can you open your microphone, Al? No. Sorry, he wrote to me that he has one.
Oh,
But okay, well, maybe we'll have to follow up with an email afterwards. So on that note, I will say, oh yeah, did you want to say one more thing?
does Zara have a question
Or something to add?
or something to add?
Oh, I got Elle's question afterwards.
Oh,
so.
okay.
Did Zara
I'm
want to
just-
say something?
Zara, do you want to say something?
Hello, how are you? Nice joining all of you. This is very interesting. And as Joyce said, I'm a tour guide and mainly I'm specialized in literary Alexandria with all the writers who lived here, like Lawrence Darrow, Daphne du Maurier, Forster, Kafafis. So I'm so interested about literature because I feel the people like to learn the history from literature more than the history book. So if I have seen a movie or I read a novel, this is touch my heart more than watching the television and watching the news. So it was the best way to introduce that we had Jew in Egypt. It was mainly by novels, by writers, because touch the people heart. And a very interesting novel, like the novel Joyce translated for Tobie Nathan, it talked about the Haret, the Egyptian people, the normal people, which is equivalent to Naguib Mahfouz, the one who get the Prize of Nobel for the trilogy. This is just that we are simple people. We are nature people. This is the daily life scene. I never thought about being Muslim or Christian and Jew. We are all one. We are in the same apartment building, live together. We are intermarried.
Straight out.
We are the same, not different. Whatever we had
On the Jews of Egypt. It's fascinating.
Somebody else needs to turn off their microphone.
Yeah, can everybody turn off their mic? I'm trying to see who it is talking.
I've been talking to like people
And I don't see.
just passed away in
Nobody
Israel,
else.
and they said like, anyway. You know what?
Sorry about this. Oh, I got it.
Okay. Zara, continue, please.
Okay.
Yeah,
So we are
apologies.
here. We know the difference between politician and between politics and the ordinary people. We are the same. So we know how we lived together. For example, my life story. I'm a Muslim, which is my Egyptian roots is mainly Jewish roots. And we lived all together in the same apartment building. So we had one apartment for Jew, the one who raised my mom. And she's still up till now crying if she remember her name because she missed her a lot. She's the one who's taking care of her dress, her school, and her language and everything. And we lived together, eat together. We used to go for the funeral together, for the wedding together. We speak Arabic and French together, which we speak till today. The language we are speaking in Alexandria here is called the Franquette, Franco-Italian. In the same sentence, we speak Arabic, English, French, Italian, Turkish. We are multicultural. Being Jewish or being Muslim or being Christian, we are all the children of Abraham, no difference. So we are raised that way. So I feel that's so interesting to read novel telling about the same story, because my main target, the new generation, raised up same like me, raised up, which is the family all together. English, it became international. So everyone, which is Joyce and Jane, whatever they did is amazing, because this is make everyone can read. French is the same for Alexandria, and all of us speaks French very well. But also, if it will be made as a movie, and people will watch it on the television and on cinema, talks about how the people lived together, this will be the super. I take my tourists to make for them walking tour in Alexandria, for example, make a book tour, take the novel, for example, if Joyce and Jen will make writing a book about Alexandria, so I will make it as a tour. Take the people to the places where the character used to live.
That's great.
Take them to the restaurant, to the cafe, walk on the corniche, go to the synagogue, go to the mosque, because I cannot distinction between Muslim and Jewish together or Christian. I'm taking my young troops right now for the school groups. I take them to visit the synagogue, to the church, to the mosque. I have to raise all that we are the same. So if we have one of amazing novel wrote about Egypt, say like for Lucette, for Jean, for Joyce, will be a movie, I think this will be the best way ever to educate the new generation.
So there is, thank you so much, Sarah. Thank you so much. My God.
My God. Because
what is so wonderful.
My heart.
So another book I thought about, Rachel, you were asking about books, and another novel I thought of is The Yacubian Building by Ala Al-Aswani, which is a great novel. And there is a movie of the Yacubian Building.
Exactly. Many of us didn't read the book, but we have seen the movie. For Naguib Mahfouz, most of us have watched the movie, the three trilogy, Asr which is the Street Sugar, Bin al-Asrin, the two road between two palaces. So it's very interesting that we make a movie about the daily life for the communication between us. Because, for example, I know the same story. I know many Muslims raised up Jew, and many Jews raised up Muslim, left it together. Yeah. And this is the best way to live in peace. This is the main target we are looking for.
I want to make sure to get Al's question in before we close off.
Thank you.
So in the 70s, that's a long question. In the 70s, I met a young Egyptian who said there's no anti-Semitism in Egypt. An Argentinian young man could not believe this. Many years later, I met a Moroccan Jewish woman on a Greyhound bus from Montreal to New York. She said relations between Moroccans and Jews was good, much better than between the French and the Jews in the country. Can you confirm this in regards to Egypt in terms of the 70s? There's a second part to the question. The exodus of Jews from Morocco was voluntary due to Zionist yearnings. I'm not sure, but we'll leave that at the side for this talk. To what extent was the exodus from Egypt simply a reaction to the Suez War and later to the 1967 war? And would you say it was a forced exile, which we did respond to a little, or one deriving from sense of security on the part of the resident Jews? So first, what was the relationship between Jews and Muslims like in Egypt in the 70s? And then I guess, in your opinion, was it a forced exile? And I think we touched upon it a little with the Sami conversation, but you decide.
I'll say what I know and then turn it over to Jean, because I don't know about Egypt in the 70s, but everything I've heard is that it wasn't so good, that there was more or less, Andreas Iman talks about the late 60s and, having anti-Semitism sort of be the official policy in the school where he was a student. So I'm not so sure. But And then as for whether people left of their own volition or were forced out, I think it was a combination. There are definitely people who were told, you have to leave within 24 hours, get out. And there are some people, my own father left in 1951. Nobody was forcing him out. He felt like it wasn't going to be so good. So he waited to get on, admitted to the United States, and we came to the United States. So I think there's many different stories. Jean? I mean,
well, that really, is exactly it. There are so many different stories, and they come from the same place, but they are all very different stories. It's a mosaic. It is. And it all touches, it all circles the same historical facts, the same situations, the same place, but each story is extremely individual and has something new to add to the whole mosaic.
And I think that's part of the beauty also of Egypt is there were so many different communities there and they all interacted, but you can't say Egyptian Jews and know if you're Ashkenazi, Sephardi, Berber, Yemenite, whatever you are. It was such a mix there.
Yes.
Yeah. And Tobie Nathan actually says that in A Land Like You, he talks about we were multiple, right? He says we were multiple. And that's an important aspect of all of our thought.
Like you.
And I think that's a great point to end on. So we all think about it because we all are multiple, right? Here, we're all sitting here. Again, thank you so much. Thank you all who participated as well. And thank you particularly to Jean and Joyce. And really, we cannot recommend the book enough. And I still have to read both of your memoirs, so I will work on that as well. And we'll send a follow-up tomorrow. Please feel free to email me. I'll send you my email tomorrow with any questions or follow-up questions you may have. And we're looking forward to seeing all of you again soon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dora.
Have a wonderful day, evening, wherever you are in the world.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Bye.
Everybody.
Thank you all for joining us. Really great. Thank you. Thank you, Dora.
Thank you, Dora, for putting this together.